Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Authentic English for Curious Learners. This week we're talking about, I think, some quite difficult questions. Me and Miss Minia both think they're quite difficult. The part one is about buildings, old buildings. What does even old mean? How old does a building have to be to qualify? And our part two answer is describing an interesting building that we've seen. Again, what is interesting? What can I list? I think you'll want to listen because we talk about different ways to approach these questions and strange or odd questions like these. As always, remember to check the description for the transcript of the episode, as well as for a list of useful vocabulary that we use in the episode that you can study and use in your own answers. Now, let's get to the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of Authentic English for Curious Learners. How are you, Miss Minia?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Mr. Kevin.
Today we're going to be talking about the part one topic of buildings, old buildings, and the part two topic of describe an interesting building. And me and Minia were just talking. We think these are kind of difficult, don't we?
Yeah,
Why do you think
I
they're
don't
difficult?
usually think about buildings or read about them.
Yeah, that's kind of how that's kind of what I think as well, like old buildings. And also, what does that mean? How old? What kind of building is interesting? Do they mean a landmark? Do they mean just a random building in your neighborhood? We can talk about that when we go into part two. But I do think these are difficult. So hopefully we'll have some good vocabulary for you. You can check that out in the description below, as well as the transcript. So, old buildings. Have you ever seen any old buildings in your city?
I'm sure I have. It's logical for a city to have both modern and old buildings. And I think most old buildings in my city are historical buildings, like the government building.
You
So I just had
know,
to make it up a little bit
I
here
think that's
because
right. And I think even you, obviously, you're an English teacher, you have incredibly high level English, but you kind of paused before you answered the question. I think it's a strange question, and I think it is going to cause students to pause. It's going to throw them, for lack of a better
yeah.
word. Yeah, I'd say the same thing. Of course, I've seen old buildings. Can I name one right now? Probably not. But my city that I lived in America was, several hundred years old. So by American standards, that's pretty old. And there were a lot of old buildings there. There were a lot of new buildings there as well, but there were a lot of old buildings. Nothing really sticks out as any special old building. Maybe the courthouse, like you said, like a government building. But
Mm.
other than that, I think that's enough.
So saying government building is correct, right?
I think if you can name, if you can name a specific building, like I
I'm
said,
thinking of
courthouse is
that.
more specific than government building, right? Or city hall, like the head government building.
Okay, that's called the city hall.
Hmm.
Because I'm thinking of that building where, so probably it's city hall, but also that's where people used to work in.
Is it the presidential palace?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say it's the palace?
Yes. Because that's what it's
Okay.
translated to in English.
Okay.
But that's a good thought there. So I do think that there are things like the building might be called something in your native language that wouldn't necessarily translate into English. I don't know if that's a
Yeah.
problem as long as you can describe it. You could say, I don't, I mean,
Hmm.
if you had said in English, I don't know what it's called in English, but it's the building where Uncle Ho used to work after independence of Vietnam. I don't know,
Okay.
that's a
Yeah,
fine
that's so
answer.
much. Yeah, and it conveys the meaning. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What about living? Well, I'll answer the question. Do you prefer living in an old building or a modern house? In Vietnam, I'm in a pretty modern high rise, which is very nice. But in the United States, my house was built in 1910, so quite old by United States standards. However, it had been, we could use the word refurnished, not refurnished, renovated. Renovated.
Uh-huh.
So brought up to modern standards. Like the plumbing, the wires in the wall, everything was modern. The kitchen was modern, the bathrooms were modern. So the building was old, but everything had been renovated. So I kind of like the mix, right? It looks old, but it's still very comfortable. In Vietnam, I want modern. What about you?
Why?
Why? I think it's more comfortable. You know, the weather is very different here, right? And I like my air conditioning. And normally the high rises have tighter windows. There's newer windows, newer doors. Keeps my energy costs down. And I like being up high. I like looking over the city, or where I live, I can see the river and the ocean. That's quite nice. What about you?
Mm-hmm. Definitely a modern building. There's something to it, especially when it's newly built. Nobody's ever lived there before. You just want to live there right away. I guess it's the comfort, like you said. Everything is catered to you. Everything is up to state of the art
Ye-
technology and stuff.
I think you could say up
Um,
to date there too. I mean,
okay.
yeah, state of the art is even more extreme, which might be very true. But I wouldn't say the things are state of the art in my building. Maybe in one of the newer constructions, but they're definitely up to date, right? It's modern
Okay.
appliances, modern bathroom facilities.
Mm, yeah. And I love the minimalistic design of the newer buildings. I feel like old buildings are a bit clunky.
Mm,
For example, the windows can have like they can have two parts, and I
mm.
just don't feel like it's a good use of material.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. They are. They're a lot. New construction tends to be sleeker, right? It's smoother. It's more
Mm,
modern. Minimalistic, simplistic. I like that too. I like
mm.
that too.
Having
Although, I
said
mean, I
that, though,
go
I'm
ahead.
sure the older generations had a reason to do that, and I'm
Sure.
sure it really helped with like insulation or
Right.
energy costs. Yeah,
Yes, it was a different time and different needs. And I've been in a lot of old Vietnamese houses that I thought were, beautiful.
yeah, and very cool, by the way.
Mm,
Like they don't need air conditioning, but in Vietnamese summer, they are still very comfortable
mm,
to be in.
yes. High ceilings, not many windows to let the sun in, so they tend to be a little dark sometimes, but it works. It works.
Mm, hmm.
It'll be interesting to see if, as energy costs increase, we go back to building like that. Now we kind of force, we have aircon, we have heating, and we don't really worry about the cost of energy. Where we could, in the United States was the same way. My grandparents lived in a much older house, and it was designed much differently from how the modern houses work because they didn't have air conditioning.
Mm,
The ceilings were high to let the hot air rise up and get away from people. There was just a lot of design differences that were very practical at the time and saved
mm.
money.
So the old house you mentioned earlier is the one you grew up in?
No, it's the one I lived in before I moved to Vietnam.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
it was in St. Louis City, so it was one of the older houses in the city. St. Louis is an old city. Yeah, it was
Hmm.
very nice.
Okay.
So, are there any old buildings you want to see in the future? And unlike the first question, I think this is asking, obviously, for a specific old building. Now, what is old? What would you consider old?
Oh, the first thing that comes to mind is like a super old historical building and maybe a landmark because you want to see it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's probably popular and you've read about it somewhere. Um, and I can't think of anything but those Russian cathedrals
Oh,
in the Red Square.
mm-hmm. St.
They have
Basil's?
like Yeah, they have. I'm sure I visited them as a child, but I have no memory of
Hmm.
those. Like, how did that feel to be there? And I would love to like see them for myself as an adult
Hmm.
because I'm sure the architecture is like very unique
Hmm.
and not only the exterior but also the interior. So those are the buildings I would like to see.
Yeah, that would
What?
be a nice trip. Nice trip.
Yeah. What about you?
I can't think of one. That's bad. That's a bad IELTS answer. I have
Yeah.
to come up with
So
something.
show us how you would deal with it in a test.
I think it's very easy to overthink questions like this, right? Because you and I are having a conversation, so I'm like, wow, I just don't know. I've already taken too long if this is an IELTS test. The
Yeah.
first answer that popped into my mind that I have been to, and it is an interesting old building, and I could say, yes, I want to see it again, is the Reunification Palace in Ho Chi Minh City. I love the
Mm.
architecture. I love the design. I love the grounds. I love the history behind it. I spent a lot of time there just wandering around, and I just thought the architecture was just beautiful. That modernist style. So that's the first thing that popped into my head. If I'm in the IELTS, I have to go with that, right? I don't
Yeah.
have time to think about, well, I've
A
already seen that,
perfect
so is
old
there a
building, right?
better.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Mm.
I do think, and maybe in your experience too with your students, I think a lot of students do spend time trying to think of the best answer they can give.
I'm sure mine is not the best answer I could think of either, but with the time crunch, you have to like go with it and
Exactly.
just explain that, oh, I don't think it's the best one, but you just have to say it.
And you're going to say, I mean, you basically said the same thing that I did about St. Basil's Cathedral. Oh, the design, the architecture. You're going to give the same answer. I mean, we're all attracted to buildings for the same reason. So it really doesn't matter what you pick.
Mm,
You don't have time to sit and think.
yeah. And also, what is old again, right? Do you think the building you picked is old enough? But then again, you don't have any other buildings, so you have to go with it.
What would you say is a definition of old?
I feel like it has to be 100 years old or more.
Really? I'd say
Or
older
like,
than me. That's what I think. Older than
okay.
me. Like Reunification Palace was built when, in the 60s?
I think so.
Okay, I was born in the late 70s, so it's old. It's an old building to me. I would say closer to 50 years for old.
Okay. Well, I thought something like your grandparents even did. Wait, sorry, it was built before your grandparents.
It could be. I wouldn't get hung up on it too much.
Yeah, okay.
For the students, I don't think 20 years is old.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, 50, yeah, I'll go with that.
Okay.
I wouldn't I wouldn't think twice if someone said it was an old building at 50 years.
Yeah.
But you could be right. 100 is definitely a safe one. You know, the
Do you think,
Reunification Palace has been preserved. St. Basil's has been preserved. Should old
mm,
buildings be preserved in cities?
I think a lot of countries and cities have done that. So I think there must be a good reason to do that. And the first thing that comes to mind is the historical value. If these buildings weren't preserved, the younger generations wouldn't have been able to see exactly how these buildings looked like in the past. Even though having said that, I feel like preservation can sometimes lead to modifications of these buildings. So I guess preservation should happen when it doesn't affect how the building looks. So that would like help keep the value or the original structure and look of a building.
Can you give me an example of the opposite of what you're talking about, where you thought like the preservation was done poorly? Are you thinking of
I
something?
do remember something that was painted badly. Oh, maybe some of the churches, oh, sorry, pagodas in
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam. I've seen that they kind of sometimes go overboard with the colors,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe they don't feel the need to preserve the original colors. And they instead think that the newer the building looks, the better. And I don't agree with that. I feel like there's value to an old building. Like it should be able to tell visitors that it's old. But if there's like a new coat of painting that's too shiny
Mm-hmm.
and bright, it it just sends a mixed message to the visitors.
Yeah, it kind of strips away the impact or the specialness. You know, if we're preserving it, let's preserve it. Now, what about you? Say you could restore it, but let's just stay restored to the how it originally looked.
Mm-hmm. What is your opinion on this?
I tend to agree with you. Like I like the reunification palace because it's a snapshot in time. You know, it's like it was when the country was reunited in the 70s. And I find it so interesting to walk through because, yes, it's a beautiful building, but also it is almost like a museum as well to be able to step through and see what things look like. Have you ever been there?
I've only been outside.
Okay.
I guess I didn't have time.
Yeah, the
I
inside
had
is
to check
just as
it.
interesting as the outside.
Mm. So it's like a museum.
It is. It's exactly like it looks when the country was reunified.
That's nice. I just had to look it up. It was completed the 31st of October, 1966.
66, okay. So yeah, and you say about pagodas, I think the same thing about churches in the West. Sometimes I think the age of the building, even restoring it, like Notre Dame, you know, suffered that huge fire a couple of years
Mm-hmm.
ago, and they've restored it. And everyone says it's more beautiful than it was because over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, dirt builds up on the inside, smoke stains build up on the inside, and that's all been taken away. So now it looks like it looked when it was first built, which I'm sure is
Oh,
beautiful,
wow.
but also I kind of liked the way. I thought Notre Dame was a beautiful church. I kind of liked the way it looked. I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know. They should be. I think they should be preserved, but how they're restored, how they're treated, I I have mixed opinions.
Yeah, it seems like we both want to see the sign of old age on
Hmm.
that building.
Yeah, because otherwise, it feels like maybe a theme park attraction or something like Vin. You know, if I go to Bana Hills here in Da Nang, they have castles and things, but they're new castles. Okay,
Yeah,
well, I went to see an old castle, and I wanted to look
right.
look old.
Yeah, there's a different feel to it.
Definitely, definitely.
Mm.
Especially, I think sacred spaces like churches, pagodas, synagogues, mosques, and that sort of thing. These are special
Mm.
places. Okay, so the part two question is describe an interesting building. Now, what does interesting mean? You expressed to me, well, we both talked that we thought this was a hard topic. Why did you think it was difficult?
Oh, for me, I rarely read about architecture and buildings, so I felt like I didn't know a lot. Like, and for me, what makes a building interesting would be superficial and something like everybody would talk about. And I
Mm-hmm.
felt like then I wouldn't be able to come up with a topic that's really interesting. Like I wouldn't be able to resonate with it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my problem with this topic. I feel like I would be blah about it.
I understand that concern, and it's kind of reminds me of our last podcast episode or 2 weeks ago when you gave a part two about a water bottle.
Yeah.
So I recently made a video on my channel about a shopping mall, describe a shopping mall, and I just picked a mall
Oh.
that was special to me when I was little that me and my family went to. And I thought about it. There was nothing special about it. It was just a mall. Now, the story I told was about Christmas time going to visit Santa Claus. And I think the story you told about the water bottle was something personal to you. Again, I think this is a trap that students fall into, and that, oh, I need to have a spectacular story. And you don't. I think
Mm.
you need to have a personal story, something that means something to you.
Okay.
Like this,
Okay.
describe an interesting building. Well, you and I might have very different opinions on what's interesting. But it doesn't matter. The point is, the test is that you pick something and you tell me why it is interesting to you. You're not trying to convince me
Mm.
of anything. So, like
Okay.
our part one questions, don't fall into the trap where you're pausing during your prep time and trying to think, oh,
Mm.
no, that's not interesting. That's not
Oh,
interesting.
yeah.
Just
Mm.
pick something and go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you know what I'm going to say. What,
No.
what,
You want to go first?
I'll go first. I'm going to pick the Reunification Palace again. It's the first thing that pops
Oh,
into my
I'm
head.
so surprised.
It's the first thing that pops into my head. And so if I were preparing for it, I would go with that. I could pick, how many millions of buildings have you seen in your life? They're all interesting in some way. You can make a story out of any of them. So I picked the Reunification Palace. And just to talk about it again, it's in kind of the center of Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City. And it's about, what is that, 40, 60 years old? 70 years old. And it was made the Reunification Palace after the country was reunified in the mid 70s. I like it because it has a very modernist design. I think it was designed by a famous architect, but I don't remember the name. And like we were talking about older buildings, Ho Chi Minh City is hot. But I remember the building having very big open hallways that were still kind of protected from the weather, but it allowed a lot of air movement, so it was really comfortable inside, even without air conditioning. And it was a very modernist design. Maybe the style is mid-century modern, which was around that time. Clean lines, minimalist, natural materials. It's just a really beautiful building. I also find it interesting because it was an important location during the Vietnam's War for Independence and Reunification, and I love history and I love Vietnam. So being able to go there and see, wow, this is where some really important events happened. Seeing the desks, seeing the phones, walking the grounds, all of those things just I would go back there tomorrow.
Mm.
That being said, I have recommended other people visit it, and they were not as impressed as me. So I think that also speaks to the individuality of something, whether something's interesting or not.
Wow. Yes, now
That's
that
my
you
part
said
two.
it, I see how interesting it is to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the goal of the task, right?
Hands down, one of the my favorite buildings I've ever been in.
Okay. Okay.
And that, yeah, that's it. It doesn't matter if my examiner thinks it's interesting or not, or other people. In fact, I could even say that other people might not find it interesting, but for me, it was really interesting.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. You really you showed us a good example.
What's yours?
Uh, for me, it's the Taipei 101.
Oh, yeah.
Do
That's
you
the
have you ever
one.
been?
Well, describe it because I think I know what you're talking about.
It looks like a stalk of a bamboo or an elongated pagoda. So the style is super Asian like that, like the look of it, but it's a super modern and eco-friendly sort of sustainable building.
Mm-hmm.
And I only learned this yesterday when I decided to read more on it. Because I usually don't really read anything about architecture or buildings, really. Like, I guess the only times I look at buildings is maybe when I try to find hotels or resorts
Yeah,
to go to,
yeah, that's fair.
and then I would like find some buildings attractive. And and I usually what usually attracts me is like how natural as how they blend in with the nature.
Hmm.
But the reason I thought first of Taipei 101 is because I did a part of one of my lessons with my IELTS students. We watched a short clip about different kinds of skyscrapers. And after that video, I like Taipei 101 really stood out. It's because it has this large steel sphere inside of it. And if I'm not mistaken, it's called uh, mass mass damp or mass tune damp.
Damper?
Oh, tuned mass damper.
Yes. Mm.
What does damper mean?
Honestly, the only I couldn't give you a definition. I've only ever seen it in context where it reduces the effect of something else. Right.
Nice,
And you could use that
because
as a
it
verb,
does.
right? To dampen something. You really dampened my anger or something. Whereas it's like a ball, right? So if the building
Yeah,
goes this way, it shifts to stabilize
right.
it.
Yeah. So it helps. Yeah, definitely. So especially when there are winds, is for a tall building like that. One of the problems is the impact of wind, and this huge steel ball helps to counteract that. And visitors can see this huge sphere from observatories inside the building.
That's
So I
cool.
feel like, yeah, that's cool. And I regret not knowing about this building when I was in Taipei, or else I would have visited it. So now I guess I have to visit Taipei again.
The damper's under the building, right?
It's inside the building,
On the
like
lower level, though, right?
swinging.
Yeah.
I think it's in the middle level.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, even top levels because people have to get up there and can see it from like I guess 80s,
Hmm.
60s. Well,
Is it for wind or for earthquakes or both?
hmm. Mostly wind,
Okay.
and I think so anything that sways the building.
Mm, yeah, I didn't know if Taiwan had earthquakes. So next time you go to
Um,
Taipei, you'll pay a visit, huh?
Definitely,
Well, next time I
but
go to
I'm
Ho
not
Chi
sure
Minh,
when
I'll.
I'm going to go to Taipei. But next time I go to Ho Chi Minh City, I will pay a visit to the reunification building because you really made a huge deal about it.
It's again. So now I do like architecture. I don't know a lot about it, but I like it and I like design, and so that was. It's just a beautifully designed building. It's just, and of course, it's
Mm,
so pivotally important to Vietnam, which also to I always love to stand in a place where history has happened, like important events. Like I was in Berlin once,
mhm.
and I was able to go up, to the Brandenburg Gate, and there's bullet holes there. It's like I've seen pictures of the battle. I've seen, um, film reels and stuff, and now I'm touching it. And it's the same when I was in the Reunification Palace. I'm like, this is where history happened. It just makes me feel very
Mm.
close to very important events of the 20th
Now
century.
that it said touching things, I remembered another building I could have talked about, but I'm not sure if it's so anything that's built is a building. So
Yes,
take, for example, the Temple of Literature. Would you say
absolutely a
that's a
building.
build?
Yes. Now, there are monuments like now Uncle Ho's mausoleum is a building, right? But the Statue of Liberty is not a building.
Right.
Even
So anything
though
that can house people.
I think it does go to that because I mean, obviously workers go inside the Statue of Liberty. You can go in, but I wouldn't count it as a building.
Right.
I do think it has to serve a general purpose of people's use to be a building. That's what I would consider a building. So the mausoleum, Temple of Literature, absolutely, people studied there. Now, I've only been to the Temple of Literature once. Are you referring to a specific building at the Temple of Literature or the campus of the Temple of Literature?
The whole campus.
I'd be more specific than that. I mean, honestly, if you responded and said, I can't think of a singular building, but I love the group of buildings that is the Temple of Literature, and then you go on why, I think that'd be fine because you are telling me you understand the question, right? And then you're telling me that you're changing it just a little bit, 2%, so you could answer it. That shows your relevance. That shows your relevant language, and it shows your coherent answer. But I do think you have to be careful. You couldn't just... If you just started talking about a group of buildings, I would potentially doubt your coherence.
And you might think I memorized this.
I wouldn't necessarily think you memorized it, as maybe you didn't understand the question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because you didn't understand the question.
Yeah, too bad because that would be an interesting group of buildings.
It is. So again, I think you could go, it would just depend on how you led up and how you answered it.
Right.
But again, also, I don't think it has to be anything special. Like if there was a neighborhood house that you liked when you were little. Okay, it was interesting
but then it would be hard to like come up with the details about it, you know?
It might.
Yeah. I mean, the first building I thought of was actually another building, which is the Lotte Tower in Hanoi, because of its unique design. Did you know that it's supposed to look like, I forgot the word for it, but the lower part of the outside, the flap,
Oh, no.
the two flaps.
Yeah. I did
You
not.
didn't know?
No.
I told you guys at at work.
I did not
Okay,
know
maybe a different person.
It does, so I can see that, but yeah.
Yeah, but then there's nothing else I could say about it. I'm not that interested in the building, you know? It's just that the design is special. That's it.
I think you could go in to why that would be an important design for Vietnam, right? It shows a respect for culture, because Lotte is a Korean company, right? Here they are. It shows that they respect Vietnam, how important that is. Or you could go into the importance of the building to Hanoi. It's the tallest building in Hanoi. I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think it's the tallest building outside of Landmark in
72?
Yeah, in Ho Chi Minh. I think it's the tallest building in Vietnam.
Yeah, Landmark 81 in Ho Chi Minh City is the
81.
tallest one.
I do want to give everyone a warning. There's a very easy trap to fall into here that a lot of students do, sometimes even high-level students, and that is just describing the building, where they just give me lots and lots and lots of adjectives. And so, like I just said, okay, pivot it. Talk about Lotte, talk about the design, but pivot. Why do I care about that? Why do you care about that? Why do we even talk about the fact that it's designed off of the Aozai?
Yeah.
You know?
The main part should be interesting.
Absolutely. The description of the building itself is, I think, the least important part of your answer. We all learn adjectives very early on when we're learning a language, right? So giving me a list of unconnected adjectives to describe a building is, I think, quite low level. If you get into the historical significance, what this means to you, what this means to your culture, that's some high-level language. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. We want to remind you again to check out the description for the transcript and for some useful vocabulary. I think we're going to have a lot of useful vocabulary this episode.
I think so.
Yeah, we used a lot of high-level language. And we use it in context. So it should be easy for you to use as you build your own answer. And thank you for joining us.
Let us know anything you want, anything you think of us, our content in the comment.
Absolutely. We want thumbs up, subscriptions, and suggestions for future episodes. And until next time, happy studies, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.